The January 6th Select Committee and Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California is our guest. Congressman, I wish I could beat the capacity for shock out of myself when it comes to the constant relocation of the bottom for the Republicans. But this almost casual storytelling that Mitt Romney does in this book, and we just have some excerpts of it in The Atlantic at this point, reveals that the Republican leader of the Senate saw January 6th exactly as you did. The only difference is he didn't do anything about it.
You know, I also never cease to be amazed and shocked. And frankly, I don't want to lose that sensation of shock, because that will mean I've just kind of resigned myself to this kind of duplicity. But it is, you know, the excerpts I've read really do take your breath away, both in terms of what members of the Senate and others knew prior to January 6th. The culpability by the kind of guilty knowledge they had, the unwillingness to do anything about it. You know, Mitch McConnell in particular had the opportunity, really in both impeachments, to stop a very dangerous president, someone that he knew was destroying the institution that he had served in for so long, someone he knew was doing enormous damage to the country and posed a great threat to our country in the future. He had two occasions, two impeachments, to do something about it. And even in the second impeachment, after delaying the trial and then saying, well, I can't vote to impeach now because I didn't start the trial while he was still in office, he even then said, well, there's probably a better remedy, and that remedy may be prosecution. But now he still remains silent about it. And I just find it inexcusable. But yet again, we learn more about what these members did and said in private while they were doing and saying something very different in public.
It is reassuring, though, to know that the Republicans, the variable isn't seeing the facts as they really were. That when it comes to Hawley and McConnell and others that Romney testifies to in this sort of almost confessional series of interviews with his biographer, they're seeing what he's seeing. They just aren't willing to deal with the threat to our democracy because they're worried about the threat to themselves. Let me read some of that to you from The Atlantic. Quote, during the Senate trial, Romney heard the same calculation while talking with a small group of Republican colleagues. When one senator, a member of leadership, said he was leaning toward voting to convict, the others urged him to reconsider. You can't do that, Romney recalled someone saying. Think of your personal safety, said another. Think of your children. The senator eventually decided they were right. So this isn't I mean, this is a United States senator. This is one of 100 people responsible for the safety and security of the American homeland, of preserving the peaceful transfer of power and democracy. And I'm actually quite sympathetic. I think anyone in the arena right now is very sympathetic to concerns for their safety. But this craven calculation to do for the person what they wouldn't do for the country really does make your stomach turn.
It really does. You know, if I stopped every time I received a death threat, I wouldn't go to work. And, you know, my experience is not, sadly, all that atypical these days. But to have so little regard for your job, your oath, the Constitution, and the country, you know, we make decisions that end up putting people in harm's way all around the world. And if they're not willing to endure some risk at home to do the right thing to protect the country, it's just inexcusable. It does, I think, draw all the more attention to the very few examples, the very few exceptions, the Liz Cheney's and Adam Kinzinger's, and how extraordinary they are because they were so few in number. I, you know, would have thought years ago, before this whole Trump era, much more highly of so many of my colleagues who I had respected, many I had admired, because I believed that they believed what they were saying. But as it turned out, they either didn't believe it or none of it really quite mattered as much as their own personal either welfare or their personal job security or just plain personal security. And I just would not have thought that would be the case. And you know, this book is shedding more light. I found the parts about the first impeachment trial to be fascinating, and more acknowledgments that the Republicans knew we had proved the president guilty. But once again, we're simply not willing to do anything about it.
So here's a quote from McConnell. Quote, they nailed him, the Senate Majority Leader said. That was about the impeachment case against Trump. McConnell, quote, they nailed him. Now, McConnell says he doesn't recall the conversation, but you have Romney remembering that the leader of of his leader of the Senate, the Republican leader, said, you nailed him. You know, Ian Basson, who runs a democracy-focused effort, says a state can't survive if this is how their leaders function, that they see the facts, they acknowledge the facts, but they won't act on the facts. You've written a book about democracy. Can we survive?
We can survive. We will survive. I think it's really important for your viewers to understand that, you know, we'll get through this. I think when you're in crisis, and our country is in crisis right now as a democracy, it's hard to see how it ends. Sometimes it's even tough to see if it will end. But I have every confidence that this will pass. There are wonderful, beautiful, you know, compassionate people in every state in the union that will see us through this. We're about to be tested. The country's going to go through a great trial. And I don't mean any specific trial of the former presidents, but rather a test of the proposition that no one is above the law. But I think we pass that trial. I think we get through that trial. And I also think in the coming election, we have a chance to begin to turn the corner as a country. But it is very discouraging to, you know, one level, read these recollections of what people were doing and saying at the time, because you see such an abundant failure of moral courage. I remember during the first trial, I quoted Robert Kennedy, who said that moral courage was a more rare commodity than courage on the battlefield. And I questioned that during that first trial. Could that really be true? But these recollections by Mitt Romney show, well, it's pretty damn rare, moral courage.
And it's not a two-sides problem. I want to ask you to contrast Mitch McConnell's declaration that, quote, they nailed him, the impeachment managers of Donald Trump, with Republican House members' confession that there's zero evidence linking President Joe Biden to anything worthy of an impeachment. What do you make of the sham, we try not to call it an impeachment inquiry, but a speakership clinging to by Kevin McCarthy going on in the House?
Well, I mean, it is such a contrast from the methodical way we went about gathering the evidence in the first impeachment and the seriousness with which we took the responsibility of finding high crimes and misdemeanors to what we see today, which is essentially an evidence-free impeachment proceeding of some kind. And for what? Because Kevin McCarthy needs something to throw the right-wing base in order to get them not to shut down the government? Is that now what the standard is going to be for impeachment in the future, that if you're a very weak speaker and a single vote can call a vote to remove you, that you can begin some kind of impeachment something in order to keep the government open? Is that really where we've come? And sadly, the answer is yes. You know, look, a few weeks ago, he threw them some red meat and said, well, you know, I'll censure Adam Schiff if you'll keep me speaker a little longer. And now it's I'll move forward with an impeachment of Joe Biden if you keep me a speaker a little longer. You know, every time he does these sops to the right wing and the MAGA crowd in his conference, it just brings the whole institution lower. And the people who are going to ultimately suffer, the American people, I think they will shut down the government. And while so many of us want to focus on bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the fentanyl crisis, attacking inflation, attacking climate change, the real problems facing the American people, instead, Kevin McCarthy is going to expend the nation's time and attention on this evidence-free impeachment something or other, even as they shut down the government.
I have to ask you one last question, just based on your role in the first impeachment and your role in decades on the intelligence committees. What do you make of the public statements of support for Trump's legal standing from Vladimir Putin in the Putin-Kim Jong-un hangout this week? And what do you make of the extraordinary contrast between this axis of real threat to America and our allies, represented by Putin and Kim Jong-un, and the stakes that will be so much higher for Putin in the upcoming election than they were in 2016, and his willingness to get involved in 2016 is now well documented. Obviously, Putin has soldiers on the battlefield in Ukraine that he believes are directly threatened by the current American president's support for that country. How are you thinking about Russia as a threat to our elections in the coming presidential cycle?
Really, in a couple ways. First, foreign leaders do a psychological profile of our president. We do profiles of their leaders. And it doesn't require any kind of mastermind or genius on Putin's part to essentially have Donald Trump's number. If you praise Donald Trump, if you say nice things about him, he will do pretty much anything you want. He will stand next to you in Helsinki and take your side over his own intelligence agencies. And Trump tells him as much. You know, Trump loves to say, well, you know, he says nice things about me. And it's as simple as that. And, of course, there's the economic incentive for Trump, too. He's always wanted that Moscow Trump Tower, and he knows Putin holds the keys to that potential future real estate deal. So, you know, he is easily manipulated by Putin. But also, here you have Putin now scraping the absolute bottom of the international barrel, going hat in hand to Kim Jong-un, the North Korean despot, for more artillery, and in the bargain offering to help his missile technology, which would pose a real threat to the United States. It just shows what kind of a league Putin is in and what kind of a league Donald Trump is in. You know, they have, I guess, this in common. Donald Trump was exchanging love letters with Kim Jong-un, and now it looks like so will Vladimir Putin.
He's got competition, right, for Kim Jong-un's affections. Congressman Adam Schiff, at a truly extraordinary moment in the national conversation, we're grateful to get to ask you these questions. Thank you for spending time with us.